It was 10:30 on a glittering Friday night in Hidden Hills, Los Angeles, the kind of evening when the driveways are lined with blacked-out SUVs and the air hums with the quiet luxury of Hollywood's most carefully curated elite. Meghan Markle arrived at the gates of Kris Jenner's estate, the nerve center of the Kardashian-Jenner empire, a place where invitations are currency and every guest is weighed not only for fame, but for strategic value. According to eyewitness accounts, Meghan did not appear on any official guest list. When she approached, security staff reportedly checked twice, scanned the names again, and then gave the blunt verdict, "Your name is not on the list." Those 7 words spread faster than the flash of paparazzi bulbs. By the following morning, whispers had hardened into headlines. Kris Jenner slams the door on Meghan Markle. This wasn't framed as a scheduling mishap or an oversight. It was described by Hollywood insiders as a deliberate move, a message delivered in the clearest terms possible. You don't belong in this circle. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. For years, Kris Jenner has reigned as the ultimate gatekeeper of modern celebrity culture, orchestrating the Kardashian-Jenner dynasty into a billion-dollar empire, deciding who gets pulled into their orbit and who remains firmly outside. Every social interaction, every handshake, every photo opportunity is calculated, and only those who add value to the brand are granted entry. Meghan's exclusion, therefore, was not treated as a personal slight, but as a branding decision, an assessment that the Duchess of Sussex, despite her royal title and global name recognition, carried more risk than reward. Within hours, hashtags like #doorslammed and #ChrisSaysNo began trending on X, fueling a new wave of memes and late-night jokes. Commentators pointed out that Meghan's public persona had become increasingly contradictory. On one hand, a humanitarian advocating for women's rights and mental health. On the other, a social climber seeking proximity to Hollywood's most exclusive inner circles. The incident at Jenner's gates crystallized that contradiction, an image of a woman straddling two worlds, but fitting comfortably in neither. This was more than a humiliating moment at a security checkpoint. It was a cultural marker. Just as Meghan had once been accused of fracturing palace traditions in London, she was now portrayed as failing to secure her place in Hollywood. A-list circles are notoriously unforgiving, and the Kardashian-Jenner machine in particular operates with military precision. Those who don't enhance the brand are quietly removed from the narrative. By being turned away at the door, Meghan was effectively told she no longer held the golden ticket that her royal association once guaranteed. The implications extended beyond Meghan herself. For Prince Harry, who has increasingly been seen as a passenger in Meghan's Hollywood trajectory, the episode reinforced an unflattering narrative that his relevance in American celebrity culture is tethered not to his own achievements, but to the controversies surrounding his wife. Friends of the couple speaking off-record admitted growing concern not only for the couple's public image, but for Harry's long-term role in a system where Meghan's reputation is now viewed as unstable capital. And while tabloids reveled in the spectacle of a duchess being rejected at a celebrity's door, insiders noted something more chilling. This was not an isolated embarrassment, but a signal. Meghan was being shut out not only by Kris Jenner, but perhaps by the wider Hollywood elite, who increasingly saw her less as an asset and more as a liability. But the real reason Kris Jenner refused Meghan wasn't simply about a guest list behind closed doors. A confidential PR dossier had already been circulated, and its contents would prove even more damning. If Meghan's rejection at Kris Jenner's gates had been interpreted by the public as symbolic, what followed in the hours after revealed it was far from accidental. Behind the glossy facade of Hollywood soirees, decisions about who gets included and who gets excluded rarely come down to chance. A source close to one of Kris Jenner's senior brand advisors confirmed that Meghan's name had been discussed in meetings weeks earlier, not in the context of opportunity, but in the language of risk management. The conclusion, according to this source, was stark. She brings more PR volatility than value. This assessment didn't come out of nowhere. In the closed ecosystem of Los Angeles' most powerful PR firms, Meghan's reputation had been quietly cataloged for years. Each major event, the infamous Duchess difficult headlines that first surfaced during her royal tenure, the staff resignations at Frogmore Cottage, the tell-all Oprah interview that shocked Buckingham Palace, the Netflix documentary that reignited old wounds, had been logged, evaluated, and weighed against the potential upside of her celebrity status. For Kris Jenner, who has built a dynasty on controlling narratives, unpredictability was the one thing that could not be tolerated. Hollywood thrives on scandal, but only when it can be monetized. Meghan's scandals, however, were viewed as corrosive rather than lucrative. The risk wasn't just about headlines, it was about association. PR executives whispered that any collaboration with Meghan risked tethering the Kardashians' carefully maintained empire to palace-level drama, a form of baggage that not even the most media-savvy family in America wanted to inherit. Harry, by extension, was drawn deeper into the shadow. Once the most eligible royal bachelor, now rebranded in California as an activist and documentary producer, he increasingly found himself framed less as an individual and more as the drama that follows Meghan. His friends, particularly those who had known him before Megxit, worried aloud that every decision tied to her networking efforts pulled his name into yet another cycle of criticism, diluting his voice and making him appear less like a man building a future and more like a man losing control of his own narrative. The optics of the Hidden Hills rejection hit hard, but what came next was worse. Late Friday evening, an internal exchange between two entertainment PR firms surfaced online, an email chain that had not been intended for public consumption, but quickly circulated once it leaked. In it, executives discussed Meghan's perceived instability and questioned whether her name added or subtracted from the value of any event. One line stood out with brutal clarity: "She is no longer a golden ticket, she's a liability waiting to implode." The email, terse but devastating, seemed to crystallize what many had already suspected. Kris Jenner's decision was not personal, but strategic, the outward expression of a broader consensus forming quietly across Hollywood. Meghan, once welcome for her royal title and the intrigue it brought, was now being reclassified not as an insider, not even as a neutral figure, but as a reputational hazard. For Meghan, who had spent months crafting a dual-identity humanitarian thought leader, on one hand, aspirational lifestyle figure, on the other, the optics could not have been worse. To be denied entry to Kris Jenner's inner circle was embarrassing. To be labeled a liability by the very agencies that shape Hollywood's future was catastrophic. And then, just as the headlines reached fever pitch, another blow landed. A leaked email from a major entertainment company suggested Meghan wasn't just being sidelined by Kris Jenner, but was quietly being placed on a wider soft blacklist, a silent exile that no one had yet dared to speak of publicly. The leaked PR email had already painted a bleak picture, but what emerged over the next 48 hours deepened the narrative and confirmed the suspicions many had whispered about in private. Meghan wasn't just turned away at Kris Jenner's gates, she was quietly being written out of Hollywood's future. According to documents shared with Variety, several top entertainment agencies had in recent months placed her name on what insiders call a soft blacklist, an informal but powerful mechanism that doesn't announce itself publicly, yet dictates everything from casting choices to event invitations. Unlike an official blacklist, which tends to follow scandal, legal fallout, or public disgrace, a soft blacklist operates invisibly through silence and omission. Meghan's projects, once eagerly pitched, were now being met with polite refusals. Her calls, once answered swiftly, were being rerouted to junior staff or left unanswered. Her presence, once considered a draw, was now flagged as a complication. As one agent put it in brutal shorthand, "Not banned, just not wanted." The implications were devastating. Meghan had at one point explored developing a lifestyle series with Hulu, a platform already in business with the Kardashians. But according to an insider, the proposal never made it past the first round. It was a flat no. The source revealed not because the concept was weak, but because the name attached was too volatile. The rejection aligned perfectly with the growing consensus. Meghan's royal title no longer opened doors, it closed them. For Harry, the consequences were equally painful. Invitations once extended to him in his own right through his military service, his mental health advocacy, his philanthropic work were now often framed through Meghan, creating the impression that his relevance existed only as an extension of her drama. Friends who had supported his transition to life in California began to distance themselves not out of malice, but out of fear of association. As one former confidant admitted to The Hollywood Reporter, Harry's not the problem, but he comes with the problem, and in this town, guilt by association is everything. Public reaction mirrored this shift. What began as sympathy for Meghan's rejection turned into a harsher critique. Was she actively sabotaging her own prospects by chasing circles that clearly didn't want her, or was she the victim of a coordinated freeze-out? Too powerful to fight comment threads and talk shows debated the question, endlessly dividing opinion between those who saw her as desperate for relevance and those who believed she was being punished for daring to challenge two entrenched systems, the monarchy and the Hollywood machine. The irony was sharp. Meghan, who had once commanded global attention for stepping outside the palace walls, now seemed unable to secure her place, even within the celebrity networks she had sought to join. The same charm that once captivated millions now appeared less persuasive in rooms where gatekeepers calculated risk in spreadsheets and brand forecasts. In Hollywood's cold logic, unpredictability was a liability, and Meghan had become the embodiment of it. And yet, just as the story seemed to settle into inevitability, another revelation surfaced, this time not from Hollywood insiders, but from across the Atlantic. A confidential briefing note circulated among a small circle of palace advisors in London suggested that Meghan's Hollywood exile might not be entirely organic. It hinted at a quieter hand one that had been guiding the narrative from behind the scenes, ensuring that Meghan's name carried the weight of scandal long after the cameras had turned away. The idea was chilling. What if Meghan wasn't just failing to break into Hollywood, but was being actively pushed out with palace influence crossing oceans to close doors before she could even knock? The suggestion that Meghan's struggles in Hollywood might not be the result of her own missteps, but of something more orchestrated, sent shockwaves through both sides of the Atlantic. The confidential briefing note leaked to a UK broadsheet and swiftly verified by multiple insiders outlined conversations between palace advisors and discreet PR intermediaries in Los Angeles. Its phrasing was careful bureaucratic, even yet its intent was unmistakable partnerships involving high-risk figures should be assessed for reputational exposure with guidance shared discreetly to protect institutional stability. On paper, no names were mentioned. In practice, everyone understood exactly who the high-risk figure was. Meghan, already reeling from the Kris Jenner humiliation and the whispers of a soft blacklist, now appeared to be fighting not just Hollywood's cold calculus, but the quiet persistence of the institution she had walked away from. The note, reportedly circulated in 2019 as the Sussexes prepared to step back, recommended discouraging partnerships that amplify disruptive narratives, a phrase that insiders say was designed to cast doubt on Meghan's reliability without requiring any direct action. Instead, the strategy relied on subtle nudges, discreet conversations, and the steady drip of reputational warnings that made her seem like a dangerous bet. As one media analyst put it, it's not about blacklisting, it's about making others believe they came to the decision themselves. The pattern began to look less like coincidence and more like design. Meghan's failed Hulu pitch, her abrupt exclusion from celebrity charity galas, even her struggle to secure high-profile podcast guests, all these moments previously chalked up to bad timing or poor strategy now seem part of a larger architecture of resistance. Meanwhile, the contrast with William and Kate grew sharper by the week. The couple praised for their stability and discipline were everywhere, launching new foundations, hosting glittering galas, drawing international headlines for their poise and purpose. They embodied what the palace called continuity of the crown, a phrase echoed eerily in the very dossier that warned against Meghan. Every image of Kate smiling with schoolchildren, every photo of William at a veterans memorial became not just good press, but a counterweight to Meghan's narrative of exclusion and struggle. For Meghan, the stakes could not have been higher. If Hollywood had indeed been subtly influenced by palace whispers, her exile was no longer just personal, it was systemic. She wasn't merely locked out of a Kardashian party. She was being defined globally and permanently as the opposite of value, unpredictable, volatile, corrosive. And for Harry, this meant the dream of building an independent legacy in California was collapsing before his eyes, not because of a lack of ideas or effort, but because every door they knocked on had already been marked with invisible ink, "Do not open." The emotional toll became harder to disguise. While official photos captured Meghan strolling serenely in Montecito, insiders reported that behind the scenes, she felt increasingly betrayed not just by Hollywood's cold shoulder, but by the lingering shadow of an institution she thought she had escaped. Harry, ever protective, reportedly urged restraint, fearing that another explosive interview or documentary would only reinforce the very narrative they were desperate to escape. But restraint may no longer be an option for Meghan, was already preparing one final move, a direct response she believed could rewrite the narrative, yet which those closest to her warned could just as easily seal her fate. The whispers had grown into headlines, the dossier had drawn blood, and now all eyes turned to Meghan herself, waiting for the inevitable counterstrike. Those close to her insisted she had already recorded a response, a carefully scripted address that blended confession with accusation, designed to reclaim her voice from the institutions and industries that seemed determined to silence her. But the question that haunted her team was simple. Would pressing publish shift the narrative or only harden the perception that she was a figure forever at war with systems larger than herself? In Montecito, Meghan appeared calm, captured by photographers, in casual yoga gear, coffee cup in hand, her expression serene yet unreadable. But insiders painted a different picture. They spoke of late-night strategy calls, drafts of statements rewritten again and again, and a growing tension between Meghan's instinct to speak and Harry's plea for restraint. Harry, increasingly weary of the cycle, feared that another public airing of grievances would push them deeper into the very box they were trying to escape forever, defined not by what they built but by what they fought. Hollywood, meanwhile, remained unmoved. The leaked blacklist, the dossier, the silent rejections, these were not mistakes that could be undone with a single video or statement. In an industry where perception is everything, Meghan's brand was now equated with instability, unpredictability, and endless controversy. The very currency she once carried, her royal association, had been devalued to the point of becoming a liability. One executive summarized it coldly: "She's not banned, she's just not useful." And yet there was a cruel irony in the situation. Meghan, once accused of dismantling the traditions of the British monarchy, now found herself dismantled by the traditions of Hollywood, a place that feeds on relevance but discards those who bring more risk than return. Where once she had been the outsider who shook the palace, she was now the outsider locked out of a celebrity mansion. Where once Harry had been celebrated as a prince reborn in California, he was now increasingly seen as collateral, a man bound to a narrative he could neither control nor escape. The symbolism was unavoidable. Meghan stood at the gates of two worlds, both of which had turned their backs: the monarchy, which cast her as a destructive force, and Hollywood, which dismissed her as a liability. She was caught in the liminal space between royal scandal and celebrity irrelevance, her every move scrutinized, not as a new chapter, but as further proof of a story already written for her. And yet, was this the end of her relevance, or simply the beginning of a darker transformation? Could Meghan still reframe herself as the victim of two ruthless systems, carving out a third path where neither palace nor Hollywood held sway? Or had she already lost control of her story, reduced to a cautionary tale of ambition outpacing acceptance? That is where the world remains divided. So we put the question to you: is Meghan the victim of a silent campaign engineered to erase her, or the author of her own downfall? Was Kris Jenner's slammed door a warning sign of systemic exile, or simply the natural result of choices that burned too many bridges?